When two fake HOA enforcers forced their way into my home and put their hands on my disabled son, they never expected my MMA coach friend would be there, or that justice would be served with perfectly legal precision they never saw coming. The afternoon sun bathed our modest suburban home in a warm glow as I sat at the dining table, sifting through the never-ending pile of bills. Through the sliding glass door, I could see my son Ethan in his wheelchair, carefully tending to his small garden patch in the backyard. Despite being only 16, Ethan had developed an incredible green thumb, a passion that had helped him through the difficult adjustment after the accident that took his ability to walk 2 years ago. My friend Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, mixing protein shakes while keeping a watchful eye on Ethan. Marcus had been my M&A coach for years before becoming a family friend, and now he volunteered his time twice a month to help with Ethan's physical therapy when our regular therapist couldn't make it. With his massive frame and fighter's build, most people found Marcus intimidating, but around Ethan, he was nothing but gentle patience. "He's getting stronger," Marcus observed, sliding a shake across the counter toward me. "His upper body development is impressive." I nodded gratefully. "It's all thanks to you. The regular PT just doesn't push him the same way." The doorbell rang just as Ethan was wheeling himself back inside, dirt still fresh on his gardening gloves. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached the door with curiosity. Standing on my porch were two men in what looked like security uniforms, dark blue shirts with a patch that vaguely resembled a police badge, but clearly wasn't. One was short and wiry with a permanent scowl, while the other was heavyset with an aggressive stance. "Can I help you?" I asked, leaving the security chain on the door. The shorter man thrust a laminated card toward the gap in the door. "HOA Compliance Unit. We've received reports about unauthorized landscaping modifications to this property." I squinted at the badge, which looked homemade. I don't recall our HOA having a compliance unit with uniforms. "New initiative," the heavyset one barked. "We need to inspect the backyard immediately." Something felt off. Our HOA was strict, but they typically sent letters before any kind of inspection. I'd never seen these men at any community meetings. "I'm afraid this isn't a good time," I said firmly. "If the HOA has concerns, they can send an official letter, and we can schedule something." The shorter man's face reddened. "We don't need an appointment. HOA Bylaws Section 8.3 gives us right of inspection. Open the door now, or you'll be facing daily fines starting today." Before I could respond, Ethan wheeled himself into the foyer. "Dad, what's going on?" The men peered through the gap and spotted Ethan in his wheelchair. Something in their demeanor shifted, a flicker of hesitation followed by a renewed aggression. "Look," the heavyset one said, "we don't want any trouble. Just let us take a quick look at whatever that kid's been planting, and we'll be on our way." I felt my protective instincts flare. "That kid is my son, and he's not breaking any rules. His garden plot is well within the permitted guidelines." What happened next occurred with shocking speed. As I began to close the door, the shorter man suddenly shoved his foot in the gap and pushed forward. The security chain snapped with a loud ping, and both men forced their way inside. Ethan, startled by the sudden intrusion, wheeled backward, but the heavyset man caught the handles of his wheelchair. "Let's just see what you've been growing out there, shall we?" he sneered, starting to push Ethan toward the back door despite my son's protests. "Get your hands off my son." I lunged forward, but the shorter man intercepted me, shoving me back against the wall. "Stay put, or this gets worse," he threatened, placing his hand on something at his belt that looked disturbingly like a taser. "We just need to document the violations." The pivotal moment in any confrontation story is when the hero emerges to challenge the antagonists. In the Defender Steps In section, we witness Marcus transforming from a supportive friend to a formidable protector. This extended breakdown explores the psychological, physical, and emotional elements at play during this crucial turning point in the narrative. The silent observer. When the fake HOA enforcers burst into the home, they made a critical error in their situational awareness. Marcus, having spent years in combat sports where awareness of one's surroundings can mean the difference between victory and defeat, had noticed their arrival from the kitchen. While Michael attempted to handle the situation through dialogue, Marcus had already begun assessing the potential threat. His fighter's instinct recognized the aggressive body language and suspicious credentials long before the confrontation escalated to physical intimidation. The moments before Marcus revealed himself were filled with calculated observation. He noted their positioning, their physical builds, how they moved, and most importantly, where their attention was focused. The shorter man's hand placement near his hip suggested a concealed weapon, while the heavy-set man's aggressive handling of Ethan's wheelchair indicated a willingness to use physical force against a disabled teenager. For Marcus, these observations weren't just concerning. They were triggering a protective response deeply ingrained through years of training. As he silently moved from the kitchen to the living room, protein shake still in hand, Marcus's presence remained undetected by the intruders. This was not coincidental, but a testament to his controlled movement, another skill developed through his martial arts background. The ability to move without telegraphing intention is fundamental in MMA, where telegraphing a strike or movement gives opponents time to counter. In this moment, Marcus utilized this same principle, becoming almost invisible until he chose to be seen. The calm before the storm. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried a quality that Michael immediately recognized from his fighting days. It wasn't raised or overtly threatening. Instead, it possessed a measured quietness that seasoned fighters often develop. This tranquil delivery masked the controlled fury behind his words, creating a dissonance that often unnerves those unfamiliar with true combatants. The phrase, "I believe you're making a serious mistake," wasn't just a warning. It was an opportunity for de-escalation, the verbal equivalent of a fighter touching gloves before a match begins. The psychological aspect of this moment cannot be understated. Marcus understood that physical confrontation is often preceded by psychological intimidation. By positioning himself as an authority figure, a member of the actual HOA board, he immediately challenged the intruder's fabricated power structure. This wasn't merely a tactical move. It was an attempt to resolve the situation without violence by undermining their fraudulent authority. The heavy-set man's uncertain laugh revealed the first crack in their confidence. Confronted with someone who clearly wasn't intimidated, who claimed legitimate authority, and who projected physical capability, doubt began to erode their aggressive posture. This momentary hesitation is often the first sign that a bluff has been called, and Marcus, experienced in reading opponents, would have recognized this subtle shift. When the heavy-set man asked, "And who the hell are you?" he was attempting to regain psychological ground through verbal aggression. This is a common tactic when authority is challenged, to counter-challenge and attempt to shift the power dynamic back in one's favor. Marcus's response was masterful in its simplicity. "I'm the guy who's about to show you what happens when you put your hands on a disabled teenager." This statement accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it centered the moral transgression, the manhandling of Ethan, as the primary issue, shifting focus away from HOA regulations or jurisdictional authority. Second, it established an unmistakable boundary and consequence structure. And third, it contained an implicit threat that was conditional on their continued behavior rather than a direct provocation. The psychological impact of such a statement cannot be underestimated. For individuals accustomed to intimidating others through false authority, facing someone who completely disregards that authority and instead frames the confrontation in moral terms can be deeply unsettling. The intruders were now faced with someone who wasn't playing by their rulebook, but was instead operating on principles they couldn't manipulate. The shorter man's decision to reach for his taser represented the point of no return in the confrontation. This action revealed several critical pieces of information. He was armed with a potentially deadly weapon. He was willing to use it in a situation that didn't warrant such force, and he considered himself justified in escalating to this level of violence. For Marcus, trained to respond to threats while maintaining proportional force, this action eliminated any remaining ambiguity about the need for intervention. The description of Marcus's movement, with the practiced precision that had made him a regional MMA champion, encapsulates years of training distilled into mere seconds of action. In combat sports, movements become so ingrained through repetition that they bypass conscious thought, allowing fighters to react with what appears to be superhuman speed to the untrained eye. What Marcus executed wasn't improvised in the moment, but was the product of thousands of hours of practice. The technique Marcus employed, redirecting the attacker's arm and executing a leg sweep, demonstrates sophisticated control. Rather than meeting force with greater force, which might have escalated the violence, he used the intruder's own momentum and balance against him. This approach reflects the influence of grappling disciplines within MMA, which prioritize control over damage. The submission hold he applied afterward further exemplifies this philosophy, immobilizing the threat without causing unnecessary injury. The secondary threat response. The heavyset man's charge represents a common reaction when faced with the sudden neutralization of an ally, panic leading to uncontrolled aggression. This predictable response would have been something Marcus anticipated, allowing him to maintain control of the first attacker while simultaneously preparing for the second. The simplicity of Marcus's defense against the charging man, a strategic leg extension causing the attacker to trip forward, reveals the principle that effective self-defense often relies not on complex techniques, but on fundamental concepts applied perfectly. By merely controlling space and using the attacker's forward momentum, Marcus allowed physics to do most of the work. The result, the man's collision with the wall, demonstrates how redirected force can be more damaging than applied force. This sequence illustrates a core principle of high-level martial arts: economy of motion. Marcus didn't release the first attacker to deal with the second, nor did he need both hands to neutralize the charging threat. This efficiency highlights the difference between trained and untrained combatants. The former can achieve maximum effect with minimal exertion, while the latter often expend unnecessary energy through telegraphed, inefficient movements. The psychological aftermath. In the immediate aftermath of the physical confrontation, a crucial psychological shift occurred in the room. The fake HOA enforcers, who had moments before projected authority and aggression, were now visibly subdued. This transformation wasn't solely due to their physical defeat, but also to the complete dismantling of their psychological leverage. Their fake badges and fabricated authority were revealed as paper-thin in the face of genuine capability. For Ethan and Michael, witnesses to this efficient display of protective force, the experience likely elicited complex emotions. Relief would have been primary, the immediate threat neutralized without harm coming to either of them. But beyond that, seeing Marcus, whom they knew as a friend and coach, reveal this aspect of his capabilities would have transformed their perception of him. The gentle coach who helped with physical therapy had demonstrated that this gentleness was a choice, not a limitation. Marcus's demeanor throughout the physical confrontation would have remained calm and controlled, never escalating beyond what was necessary to neutralize the threat. This control represents the highest expression of martial skill, not the ability to harm, but the ability to control outcomes with precision. His actions protected not only Michael and Ethan, but ironically also protected the intruders from the more serious injuries that could have resulted from a less controlled response. The ethical dimensions. The scene raises interesting ethical questions about the use of force. Marcus's intervention was clearly justified. He was protecting a disabled minor and his friend from aggressive intruders who had forced their way into a private home and were armed with a taser. But his measured response also illustrates the ethical framework that often accompanies serious martial arts training: the responsibility to use minimum necessary force. Throughout the confrontation, Marcus gave verbal warnings, offered opportunities for de-escalation, and used techniques designed to control rather than injure. Even when faced with a weapon, he chose to disarm and immobilize rather than strike. This approach reflects a mature understanding that the goal of self-defense is safety, not retribution. For Ethan, witnessing this measured response would provide a powerful lesson that strength carries responsibility, and that true power lies not in domination, but in the ability to control outcomes. This moment plants the seed for the later development in the story, where Marcus offers to teach Ethan defensive techniques adapted to his situation. The resolution's first moments. As the fake enforcers sat subdued on the floor, the immediate danger passed, giving way to the first moments of resolution. The tense silence that typically follows violent confrontation would have settled over the room, punctuated only by the heavy breathing of the two subdued men. In this transitional moment, Marcus would have maintained vigilance while checking on Michael and Ethan, ensuring they were unharmed physically, though clearly shaken emotionally. Michael's protective instinct toward his son, temporarily thwarted by the intruders, would now transfer to practical concerns, calling the police, documenting what happened, and comforting Ethan. Marcus, meanwhile, would shift seamlessly from defender to witness, mentally cataloging details of the incident for the police report to come. For Ethan, this moment might represent a complex mixture of fear, relief, and a new understanding of vulnerability and strength. Seeing someone stand up against those who would exploit his disability could be profoundly impactful, especially at his age when identity and independence are already complex issues to navigate. This pivotal scene, the defender steps in, serves as the climactic confrontation of the narrative, but also as the catalyst for the character development and thematic exploration that follows. It transforms a story about victimization into one about protection, community, and adapted strength, setting the stage for the revelations and growth that occur in the subsequent sections. The aftermath of a physical confrontation brings a particular kind of clarity. When adrenaline subsides and the immediate danger passes, space opens for truth to emerge. In Part 5, The Truth Revealed, the narrative transitions from action to exposition, unraveling the layers of deception that led to the confrontation, while establishing the legal and moral standing of all parties involved. This section serves as both resolution and revelation, answering questions while deepening our understanding of the characters and their circumstances. The arrival of authority. The presence of legitimate law enforcement in the living room creates an immediate visual and thematic contrast to the fake authority figures who had invaded the space just minutes earlier. The real police officers, with their authentic badges and professional demeanor, underscore the fraudulent nature of the HOA compliance unit that the intruders had fabricated. Officer Ramirez, specifically identified as someone Michael recognizes from community outreach, embodies the connection between legitimate authority and community service, a stark contrast to the exploitative intentions of the fake enforcers. The scene is carefully constructed to highlight the reversal of power. The formerly aggressive intruders now sit handcuffed on the same couch where they had attempted to assert dominance, their physical discomfort from Marcus's defensive actions symbolizing their diminished status. The ice pack on one's head and the flexing of a sore shoulder serve as physical reminders of the consequences of their actions, while the handcuffs represent the transfer of control to legitimate authorities. Officer Ramirez's examination of the fake badges serves multiple narrative functions. First, it confirms for the reader that Michael's initial suspicions were justified. Second, it reveals that this incident isn't isolated, but part of a pattern. The third case we've had this month, elevating the story from a personal confrontation to a commentary on a broader social issue. Finally, it provides a platform for explaining the scammer's methodology, satisfying the reader's curiosity about their motivations while reinforcing the predatory nature of their scheme. The targeting strategy revealed. The explanation that these scammers specifically target new developments with strict HOAs provides insight into their predatory methodology. New developments often have residents less familiar with local procedures and authorities, making them more vulnerable to impersonation schemes. Additionally, Communities with strict HOAs create an environment where residents are accustomed to external regulation of their property, making the concept of an enforcement officer seem plausible, even if the specific individuals aren't recognized. The revelation about their extortion technique, claiming violations and demanding immediate payment, exposes how such scammers exploit the bureaucratic anxiety many homeowners feel. HOAs are often associated with rigid rules and financial penalties, creating a pressure point these criminals could leverage. The immediate payment demand is particularly telling. Legitimate organizations typically have formal processes for fines that include documentation, appeals processes, and payment plans, not cash demanded on the spot. Ethan's secret garden. Michael's question about why they forced their way in marks a transition from understanding the scammers to uncovering a more personal truth. His confusion signals to the reader that there's another layer to the story not yet revealed, creating a moment of narrative tension even after the primary conflict has been resolved. Ethan's quiet admission about his medical marijuana plant represents a significant character moment. His hesitation, he said quietly, suggests both his awareness that he should have informed his father sooner and his uncertainty about his father's reaction. The fact that this conversation happens in front of law enforcement adds additional pressure to the revelation, raising stakes for both Ethan and Michael. This revelation accomplishes multiple narrative objectives simultaneously. It adds complexity to Ethan's character, showing him not as merely a victim of circumstance, but as someone actively seeking solutions to his medical challenges. It creates a moment of potential tension between father and son, introducing a secondary conflict at the familial level just as the external conflict resolves. And it explains the intruders' aggressive tactics. They believed they had discovered leverage they could exploit for financial gain. Ethan's immediate clarification that it's legal and his reference to Dr. Schwartz's approval demonstrates his understanding of both legal boundaries and his father's potential concerns. His possession of the proper medical documentation shows responsibility and forethought, qualities that help develop his character beyond his disability. The explanation that he was waiting until the plant matured before telling his father suggests both a desire for independence and an awareness of parental authority, a realistic depiction of adolescent navigation of autonomy within family structures. Legal clarification and criminal intent. Officer Ramirez's confirmation that Ethan's medical marijuana is legitimate serves multiple purposes in the narrative. It reassures readers who might be concerned about the legal implications for the protagonists. It validates Ethan's decision-making, and it clarifies that the true criminals in this scenario are unquestionably the fake enforcers. Her explanation of how such scammers operate, looking for leverage for extortion, completes the audience's understanding of the intruder's motivations and tactics. The phrase "not realizing it was legitimate," in reference to Ethan's plant, introduces irony into the resolution. The very thing the scammers believed would give them power actually reinforced their criminal intent when discovered to be legally sanctioned. This irony underscores a thematic element about assumptions and appearances that runs throughout the narrative. The assumption that Marcus was just a protein shake-drinking gem enthusiast rather than a skilled fighter, the assumption that the HOA enforcers were legitimate, and now the assumption that Ethan's garden contained something illicit. The threat of legal consequences. The shorter fake enforcer's threat to sue Marcus introduces a moment of tension just when the resolution seems complete. This reflects a common reality in American society, where litigation is sometimes used as a retaliatory tactic even by those clearly in the wrong. The man's focus on his wrist, rather than his own criminal behavior, reveals a self-serving perspective that further characterizes the antagonists. Marcus's calm response, simply pointing to the security cameras, demonstrates his continued control of the situation. Where the fake enforcers relied on deception and intimidation, Marcus consistently relies on truth and preparation. The security system's presence isn't coincidental, but another example of Marcus's protective instincts, as indicated by the detail that he had insisted Michael install it after Ethan's accident. This small detail enriches our understanding of Marcus's character. His concern for Michael and Ethan's welfare predates this incident and extends beyond physical training into practical security measures. The enumeration of the crimes captured on camera, forcing entry, assaulting a minor in a wheelchair, and attempting to use a weapon, serves as a damning summary of the intruder's actions, emphasizing the severity of their behavior, particularly through the mention of Ethan's wheelchair. This detail reminds readers that their victims included a disabled teenager, amplifying the moral transgression beyond the legal violations. Marcus's invitation to discuss this in court displays his absolute confidence in the righteousness of his actions and the comprehensive documentation of the intruder's crimes. His thin smile suggests satisfaction not in the violence itself, but in the complete neutralization of their threat, both physical in the moment and legal in the aftermath. This response shows Marcus as someone who understands not just physical self-defense, but also legal self-protection, highlighting his intelligence alongside his physical capabilities. The circle of protection. The scene with real police officers taking away the fraudsters brings narrative closure to the external conflict while setting up the transition to the story's denouement. The image of law enforcement removing the antagonists from the home symbolically restores the sanctity of the family space that had been violated, allowing the focus to shift toward healing and growth in the final section. Throughout this section, we see how truth functions as both a weapon and a shield. The truth about the fake enforcers' identities, revealed through legitimate police presence, serves justice. The truth about Ethan's garden removes potential shame or legal concerns. The truth captured by security cameras protects against false accusations. And the relationships between Michael, Ethan, and Marcus, built on genuine care rather than exploitation, stand in stark contrast to the deceptive intentions of the antagonists. The truth revealed does more than simply tie up plot threads. It reinforces the narrative's underlying themes about authority, protection, legitimacy, and the power of genuine community bonds in the face of those who would exploit vulnerability for personal gain. The final section of any narrative carries the weight of resolution, not just of plot but of emotional arcs and thematic elements. Part 6. The aftermath serves as both denouement and epilogue, transitioning from the external conflict that drove the action to the internal transformations that give the story lasting significance. This section moves beyond the confrontation and its immediate revelations to explore how the experience has changed the characters and their relationships with one another. The physical and emotional return to safety. The opening image of the three characters sitting in the living room creates an immediate callback to the story's beginning, establishing this circular narrative structure that suggests restoration but with meaningful differences. The physical space is the same, but the emotional dynamics have shifted. The description of tension slowly dissolving acknowledges that traumatic experiences don't simply end when the threat is removed. Their effects linger in the body and psyche, gradually releasing rather than instantly disappearing. The detail of Ethan's hands still trembling slightly provides a vulnerable physical manifestation of the fear and adrenaline he experienced. This subtle observation humanizes the aftermath of confrontation, avoiding the unrealistic portrayal of instant recovery that often occurs in action narratives. At 16, and with physical limitations, Ethan would naturally be processing the incident differently than the adults, making this physiological detail particularly authentic. The observation that there was a new look in his eyes as he gazed at Marcus signals the beginning of the transformative impact the incident has had on Ethan. This unspecified new look invites readers to interpret, perhaps admiration, gratitude, curiosity, or a complex mixture of emotions. By leaving this somewhat open, the narrative allows readers to participate in understanding Ethan's internal experience rather than prescribing it precisely. Admiration and perspective shift. Ethan's declaration that Marcus's defense was the coolest thing I've ever seen reveals a typical teenage response to witnessing impressive physical capability, especially when that capability was used in protection of oneself. The comment balances the earlier vulnerability of his trembling hands with youthful enthusiasm, creating a realistic emotional complexity. This reaction also signals Ethan's ability to process the frightening experience into something potentially empowering, rather than purely traumatic. His observation that Marcus didn't even look like you were trying demonstrates Ethan's perceptiveness. Rather than focusing solely on the outcome of the confrontation, he noticed the quality of Marcus's movements and demeanor, the controlled efficiency that characterizes high-level martial skill. This comment creates an opening for one of the narrative's key pieces of wisdom. Marcus's response: "The best fighters never look like they're trying. That's the point of all our training. Maximum effect with minimum effort," elevates the physical confrontation into a metaphorical life lesson. This philosophy extends beyond fighting to suggest an approach to challenges in general: preparation, efficiency, and measured response rather than dramatic exertion. For Ethan, who faces daily physical challenges requiring adaptations and efficiency, this principle would resonate on multiple levels. Gratitude and humble response. Michael's offering of a fresh protein shake to replace the one Marcus abandoned creates a beautiful callback to the story's beginning, completing a narrative circle. What was initially a casual detail, Marcus preparing protein shakes, now becomes a symbol of returning normalcy and appreciation. The specific mention that this shake replaces the one he'd abandoned during the confrontation reminds readers of how quickly Marcus transitioned from friend to protector when needed. Michael's simple statement, "I don't know how to thank you," acknowledges the inadequacy of words in the face of such significant protection. The brevity of this expression contrasts with the magnitude of what Marcus did, highlighting how profound acts of care often leave us struggling for appropriate expression. This is particularly meaningful coming from Michael, who as a single father to a disabled son likely prided himself on being Ethan's primary protector, yet found himself physically overpowered in that role until Marcus intervened. Marcus's reply, "No thanks needed," reflects the humility often found in those with genuine capability. This brief response suggests that he views his actions not as extraordinary, but as the natural extension of the care he already had for this family. The absence of dramatic declarations or expectations of gratitude characterizes Marcus as someone who acts from internal principles rather than for external recognition. The gift of empowerment. The conversation shifts from gratitude for past action to opportunity for future growth when Marcus suggests that Ethan might benefit from some additional training. This proposal represents a transformative gift more valuable than any physical protection, the offer to teach Ethan how to protect himself within the context of his abilities. By focusing on defensive techniques adapted for his situation, Marcus acknowledges Ethan's disability without defining him by it, suggesting that protection is a skill that can be modified rather than an ability Ethan must lack due to his wheelchair. The philosophy expressed in Marcus's statement that every person deserves to feel safe and capable of protecting themselves articulates a core theme of the narrative. This inclusive perspective challenges assumptions about vulnerability and capability, suggesting that self-protection is a universal right that should be accessible to everyone through appropriate adaptations. For Ethan, hearing this principle applied specifically to him would be powerfully affirming. Ethan's excited response, "Really? You teach me that?" reveals both his eagerness for this opportunity and perhaps his surprise that such training could be adapted for him. This enthusiasm shows how quickly Ethan has processed the frightening experience into motivation for growth, suggesting resilience and a forward-looking perspective. His question also implies that this possibility hadn't occurred to him before, highlighting how even well-intentioned people often fail to consider how self-defense and empowerment can be adapted for those with disabilities. Inclusion and community strength. Marcus' promise, starting next session, transforms his offer from hypothetical to concrete plan, giving Ethan immediate assurance that this empowerment will become reality. The casual mention of next session establishes continuity between their existing physical therapy relationship and this new dimension of training, suggesting integration rather than separate special accommodation. The lighthearted jab at Michael, and Maybe your dad will finally get back in the gym too. He's getting soft behind that desk job. Accomplishes multiple narrative functions. It breaks the potential heaviness of the moment with humor. It includes Michael in the forward movement, rather than focusing exclusively on Ethan, and it suggests a return to normal relational dynamics after the intensity of the confrontation. This gentle teasing indicates that their friendship remains unchanged despite the dramatic circumstances, reinforcing the stability of their connection. The return of laughter to the home signifies emotional recovery and resilience. After invasion, confrontation, and revelation, this simple expression of joy represents the family's ability to process trauma without being defined by it. The detail that this is the first time since the intrusion that laughter has filled the home acknowledges the impact of the event, while asserting the family's capacity to move beyond it. The redefinition of security. The final paragraphs shift from specific character interactions to broader reflection, allowing Michael's interior perspective to articulate the narrative's thematic conclusions. His observation of Marcus demonstrating techniques to Ethan creates an image of knowledge transfer and empowerment, the literal embodiment of the story's progression from protection to self-protection. Michael's realization that their house had never felt more secure, despite the recent invasion, initially seems paradoxical, but the explanation that follows resolves this apparent contradiction. By distinguishing between security derived from physical measures, cameras, locks, and security derived from community bonds, the narrative elevates relational connections above material protections. This isn't to dismiss the value of practical security measures. Michael specifically mentions installing these tomorrow, but to prioritize the human connections that give those measures meaning. The penultimate statement that the fake HOA cops had picked the wrong family to mess with, not because we were tough, but because we weren't alone, crystallizes the story's central message about the nature of true security. This reframes vulnerability not as an absence of individual strength, but as an opportunity for communal protection. For a family that includes a disabled member, this perspective is particularly significant, challenging ableist assumptions that physical limitation equals inherent vulnerability. The final line, "and that, I realized, was the greatest strength of all," completes the narrative's thematic argument by redefining strength itself, rather than equating strength solely with physical capability, which would exclude Ethan. The conclusion associates it with connection, community, and mutual support. This expanded definition is inclusive of all three central characters, regardless of physical ability, suggesting that true security comes not from physical dominance, but from the networks of care we build around ourselves and others. The aftermath thus serves not merely as plot resolution but as philosophical conclusion, transforming what could have been simply an action story about physical protection into a nuanced exploration of security, empowerment, and community in the face of exploitation and threat.